Call this meeting of Lima City Council to order. We'll begin tonight's meeting with the invocation by Councilor Glenn, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Almighty God, Lord, I thank you so much for allowing all us come together here at City Council, Lord. Lord, bless every city councilman here, our mayor and administration, also the folks in attendance, Lord. Oh God, I thank you so much for our great city here, Lord. Lord, just continue blessing it every day, Lord, as we wake up and move in new directions in our city, Jesus. Oh Lord, I ask you to thank you for blessing my family, Lord. Lord, I thank you for just keeping a full armor on me, Lord, all the things I've been through. But I thank you first, Jesus. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Gordon?
Here.
Mr. McLean?
Here.
Mr. Lowe?
Here.
Mr. Tevin?
Here.
Miss Adams?
Here.
Mr. Glenn?
Here.
Mrs. Miles?
Here.
And Mr. Nixon.
Here. Are there any amendments to tonight's agenda?
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
we need to add 2 public work reports to reports of committees.
Second. The motion, the second, is to add 2 Public Works Committee reports to reports of committees. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Consent calendar.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that item A of the consent calendar be received, filed, and approved, and item B be received and filed.
Second. The motion, the second, is to receive, file, and approve item A, and to receive and file item B. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 1.
From the Finance Director regarding legislation for budget amendments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 1 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file communication number 1. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 2.
From the Director of Community Development regarding legislation to enter into an agreement with CT Consultants.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I'm moving to communication number 2, receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file communication number 2. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 3.
From the Director of Community Development regarding legislation to enter into a contract with custom staffing.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I'm moving to communication number 3, receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file communication number 3. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 4.
From the Civil Service Board regarding the reorganization of Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Division.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I move that communication number 4 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file communication number 4. Is there any discussion?
Are we going to authorize legislation?
There's legislation on that.
No, there is, there is a strength ordinance, but not including this. So we need legislation.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I'd like to rescind my motion and redo it. I would like to make a motion that communication number 4 be received and filed and authorized for the law director to prepare the necessary paperwork.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file communication number 4 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 5.
From the Art Space Lima requesting legislation to hold the rally in the square.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I move that communication number 5 be received and filed
Second.
and authorized, and for the lawyer to authorize legislation.
Second.
The motion, the second, is to receive and file communication number 5 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 6.
From Chief Martin regarding legislation to amend the strength ordinance.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon.
I move that communication number 6 be received and filed and legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 6. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 7.
From the Director of Public Works and Director of Utilities requesting legislation to enter into an agreement with ESRI.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 7 be received and filed, and the law director prepared to make any legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 7 and to authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 8.
From the City Engineer requesting legislation to amend the contract with Solomon Electric Company.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 8 be received and filed, and the law director be authorized to prepare any necessary legislation to comply with the request.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 8 and to authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 9.
From the City Engineer regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Sydney Electric.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 9 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 9. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 10.
From the Director of Public Works regarding legislation to enter into a contract with Area Electric.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 10 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 10. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 11.
From the Director of Public Works requesting legislation to amend the strength ordinance for building and zoning.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 11 be received and filed, and the law director authorized to prepare any necessary legislation to comply with the request.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 11 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 12.
From the Deputy Director of Parks requesting legislation to enter into a contract with Marimore Industries.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 12 be received and filed, and the law director be authorized to prepare any necessary legislation to comply with the request.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 12 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 13.
From the City Engineer regarding legislation for dedication of road right-of-way on the All Lima Traffic Signal Project.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin.
I move that communication number 13 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 13. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 14.
From the City Engineer regarding legislation for dedication of road of right-of-way on the All Cole Street sidewalks.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 14 be received and filed.
Second.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 14. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 15.
From the City Engineer regarding legislation for the dedication of road right-of-way on all cable road sidewalks.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miles.
I move that communication number 15 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 15. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 16.
From the City Engineer regarding legislation for dedication of road of right-of-way for Jameson Avenue.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I move that communication number 16 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 16. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 17.
From the Director of Utilities requesting legislation to amend the contract with First Choice Tree Service.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 17 be received and filed.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 17. Does I believe that needs legislation authorized?
Yep.
Just amended.
We would need legislation to amend the contract.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that communication number 17 be received and filed and authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 17 and to authorize the law director to prepare any necessary legislation. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I failed to ask this earlier. If either Mr. Elstro, I know Mr. Shealy's not here, if Mr. Caprella, do we know percentage-wise where we're at on this project? Is 10%, 50%? Do we have any idea? I'm sorry, I apologize for not asking this earlier.
Mr. President and Council, the overall SEP project, we are just barely into meeting the needs as required per the agreement with EPA. What this is for Phase 1, which was clearing and grubbing and tree removal from Main Street heading downriver to Metcalf Street. And this portion of the project, which has been contracted out for this set amount, $52,000, the work with the addition of the additional $2,885 is complete. Now, what we do have yet to work on meeting the SEP requirements are what we call Phase 2 and Phase 3, which is the clearing and grubbing of sections farther downstream all the way to the treatment plant outfall. Those projects we have been out to bid, and we most recently opened bids this past Wednesday, but there was only one bidder, and that is being rejected, and we are going to repackage that and put that back out. So the short answer is this portion of the contract is only over by $2,800. And the long answer is there's much more work to do under the SEP agreement.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that breakdown. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Communication number 18.
From the city engineer requesting legislation to amend the contract with Henry W. Berkman, Inc.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 18 be received and filed, and the law director be authorized to prepare any necessary legislation to comply with the request.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 18 and to authorize the law director to prepare the necessary legislation. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 19.
From the city engineer regarding legislation to enter into a consent agreement with ODOT.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
I move that communication number 19 be received and filed. Legislation is on tonight's agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 19. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Communication number 20.
From the Director of Community Development regarding legislation to fix tax assessments.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn.
I move that communication number 20 receive and file legislation on the night agenda.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive and file communication number 20. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Reports of officials, Howard Elstro, Public Works Annual Report. Thank you.
so.
Yeah, I like that too, yeah.
Mr. President and Council, the City of Lima Public Works Department budgeted a total of $14.5 million in 2014, and approximately $8 million, or 55%, was directed to the operations of our engineering, building and zoning, parks and recreation and forestry, and street divisions, and the administration needs of the Public Works Department. $3.5 million, or 45% of our operational budget, are proprietary source funds. For instance, the fuel and highway taxes, the license taxes, and stormwater assessment fees, fees that are collected that can only be spent on those kind of activities. Collected fees and services total to about $800,000, and combined with our proprietary revenue account, it accounts for over half of the revenue of our required operations. Our other big expenditure is capital. Of the $5.6 million budgeted for the 2014 infrastructure improvements, streets, pedestrian bike paths, buildings, nearly all were state, federal, or other non-general fund grants. Actual infrastructure expenditures approximated $4.1 million, as several projects like Eastside Grade Separation and Simmon Field were deferred to 2015. The employees of the Public Works Department work hard to apply these funds toward improving the quality of life for the benefit of its citizens and make this community a safe, convenient place to work, live, and play. Each year, our employees find new and innovative designs and methods to stretch resources and make our community more livable. Incorporation of complete street design standards for the Elizabeth and West reconstruction, and further implementation of the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan through this Phase 5 bikeway project this past year are but two examples. This annual report highlights many and diverse tasks of the Public Works Department, which we accomplished in 2014. And as usual, I encourage you to keep this someplace handy, because each division has compiled a summary of their accomplishments this past year. So again, it's a quick reference. If you want to see how much building activity there was, it's in here. If you want to see how many kids attended playground and how many people visited the parks, it's in here. So we appreciate being able to serve the community. We certainly want to recognize Ms. Adams and the Public Works Committee, who looks over our shoulders and makes sure we have the resources that we need to carry this out. One last comment. I think all of us should keep our eyes on the federal scene as well as the state. As I've talked with the Finance Committee the past couple of years, our resources, those proprietary resources that I've talked about in the opening statement, are continuing to dwindle. And at the same time, our expenses to try to maintain our streets, bridges, our stormwater costs continue to increase. So it's becoming ever more challenging to try to make the accomplishments and keep up with the just deterioration of the infrastructure that's charged to Public Works, let alone the improvements that we'd like to see made in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elstro. Reports of committees.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams.
thank you. I have two reports from the Public Works Committee. The first one was on a meeting held February 2nd at 5 p.m. in Council Chamber. The two subjects were Chapter 642, gang graffiti, and the other subject was Chapter 1409, special building criteria within the Design Review District. The gang graffiti, there was some great constructive discussions. There were some issues brought up of who's doing what in the flow, who's responsible, so that the committee had asked for a flow chart be developed, so everyone knew how it was to operate. And also, the issue was, this ordinance only referred to gang graffiti, not graffiti in general. And we wanted a general graffiti chapter to include the same action taken by the police and by community development and LACNIP to abate it. That was left in committee, sent to the law department. I've been informed we have some drafts of the flow chart and the graffiti legislation. So later under miscellaneous, I'll be calling a meeting to discuss that. Chapter 1409, we were just getting into the operations, the boundaries. That is still in committee and is still being discussed. March 2nd, the second Public Works Committee was at 5 p.m. in Council Chamber, where I had referred amending the zoning code based on the petition at that Monday night's City Council meeting, Business 1, Business 2 districts. Discussion was held by the committee and by those in attendance. A general description of new language was proposed. It was given to the law department to develop legislation draft to come back to the committee, incorporating this new zoning, allowing the paintball and related activities to these business districts. That too, I was informed that we have that draft prepared, and that will be included in the next meeting I will call under miscellaneous business. With time left, we went on and discussed further the chapter 1409, where we were getting now into the body of the board and with other entities wanting to take part and support, and with the boundary expansion, we felt it was to increase the board to include 2 members from Kibbe Corners Development Corporation and 1 from the Neighborhood Association, Heart of Lima. So that board will, eventually when the whole chapter is passed, will go from 7 to 9. And then there was a discussion on city residency, and a compromise was reached that 5 of the 9 would be city residents. In that we're asking for special knowledge of members of either architectural background, design background, to sit on the board. It's becoming very hard to fill those vacancies with the stipulation of city residency, but all members felt that 5 of the 9 would still hold the majority, being city residents, would have a say. Mr. President, I move that the 2 meetings of February 2nd, March 2nd, be received, filed, and approved, and all members have received a copy.
Second.
The motion and the second is to receive, file, and approve the committee reports of February 2nd and March 2nd as submitted by Councilor Adams. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Moving on to ordinances. Ordinance 4415.
Amending the 2015 annual budget.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I move that ordinance 4415 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 4415 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Ms. Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 4415 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 4515.
Levying special assessments for property maintenance code charges on premises in the city of Lima.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn?
I move that ordinance 4515 be passed on its first reading.
Second?
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 4515 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? Will have the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 4515 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 4615.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with CT Consultants for assistance in preparation of the city's successor 5-year consolidated plan.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn?
I move that ordinance 4615 be passed on its first reading.
Second?
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 4615 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 4615 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 4715.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Custom Staffing, Inc. for junk auto and vehicle enforcement.
Mr. President,
Mr. Glenn?
move that 4715 be passed on its first reading.
Second?
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 4715 on its first reading. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President.
Mr. Lowe?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter contract with custom staffing for junk auto and vehicle enforcement. In the past, my record has always been against temporary services. Tonight, I had seen this, and I have spoken with 2 individuals in the 3rd Ward about this. It's desperately needed. So I'm just going on record that it's not about how I feel, but the residents are wanting this, and they want this matter to be handled. So for that, I will be supporting this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Is there any further discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 4715 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 4815.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Joseph Lime Company.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean.
I move that ordinance 4815 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 4815 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 4815 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 4915.
Authorizing the mayor to give consent to the Ohio Department of Transportation to resurface portions of state routes 65, 81, 117, and 309.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance number 49-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 4915 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 4915 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5015.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Area Electric.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 50-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5015 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5015 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5115.
Authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Sydney Electric Company.
Mr. President,
Ms. Adams?
I move that ordinance 51-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5115 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5115 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5215.
Dedicating and accepting additional right-of-way for public use for Jamison Avenue between High Street and North Street.
Mr. President,
Mr. Lowe.
I move that ordinance 5215 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5215 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5215 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5315.
Dedicating and accepting additional right-of-way for public use for North Cable Road between Market Street and High Street.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Miles?
I move that ordinance 53-15 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5315 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5315 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5415.
Dedicating and accepting additional right-of-way for public use for North Cole Street between West Robb Avenue and Bahama Drive.
Mr. President,
Mr. McLean?
I move that ordinance 5415 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5415 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5415 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5515.
Dedicating and accepting additional right-of-way for public use for Elm Street between Elmwood Place and South McDonald Street.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I move that ordinance 5515 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5515 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
And Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5515 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Ordinance 5615.
Establishing the positions and classifications hereinafter set forth and fixing the salary and compensation of such positions and classifications, repealing existing inconsistent ordinances as herein described.
Mr. President,
Mr. Gordon?
I move that ordinance 5615 be passed on its first reading.
Second.
The motion and the second is to pass ordinance 5615 on its first reading. Is there any discussion? I'll have the clerk call the roll.
Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
Mrs. Miles?
Yes.
Mr. Nixon?
Yes.
Mr. Gordon?
Yes.
Mr. McLean?
Yes.
Mr. Lowe?
Yes.
And Mr. Tevin?
Yes.
Miss Adams?
Yes.
Ordinance 5615 has been passed on its first reading by an 8-0 vote. Miscellaneous business, Mr. Glenn.
Yes, I got a couple things here. First of all, if I'm setting up a meeting for drug paraphernalia, I want to set it up for March the 30th, if that go good with all the committee members. And I'm going to take it to another location instead of city council. So I will get that place set up. And it was really great when, Miss Adams, remember you had your meeting at the Whittier School place? It was great. And you take the committee meeting out in the public. I'm going to have a location there, because I think this is very important for drug paraphernalia that we can look at. And that's, we'll put it on the 30th at 5:30. And I will let Sally know the location we're going to have it at. If not, we'll have it here. So that's one of the very, very important, and I appreciate the President, City Council had put it in committee for a while, and I see some of the stuff still propping up a little bit. So I think we need to take care of it right away. Also, we got a lot of trees been cut down by different companies around my area a lot, and I appreciate it so much. But what they're doing, they're leaving the big trunks there. No one is picking these trunks up, and I know the tree company saying they think folks are gonna come get it, and I've been pushing them a little bit, asking some guys that work with me, used to pick them up, so they need any wood. But I don't want these big old logs sitting out for the whole summer. It don't look too good out there when you pass by all these big logs in people's yards. And I don't know if it was in their contract from the electric company that they leave them logs there, or it's up to the resident to take care of them logs. We're gonna find out, because some of the residents complained about it, that no one come by, want them, they can get them. So I told, let's give a couple weeks first and see do anybody want them, first, and then we'll see what this company gonna do. Is they gonna come back and get them, because it don't look too good there. Also, I don't know when the street cleaning coming around. I know since we got this good summer weather now, I see a lot of brief out in the streets and stuff. I don't know, we're gonna run the street sweeper anytime this week, Howard? Are we gonna run the street sweeper around this week anytime, or we gonna wait?
Mr. Elstro?
Mr. President, Mr. Glenn,
Yeah,
we just went from a lot of snow last week.
I know.
And in
I know,
fact,
I'm
there's
happy.
still a lot of ice and snow.
I know, that's what
on
I'm
the
saying, we're
street.
gonna wait for a while then.
And by the way, keep in mind that we are down to one street sweeper.
That's right,
We had one damaged back in December,
that's right.
and we only have one available to us. Having said that, we've really moved to our late winter activities right now. You may see people doing some brushing in the alley.
Okay.
You may see some tree trimming out there. Saul let me know that he had 4 patch crews out today.
Yeah, he did.
That's really the order of the day right now, is to try to stay on top of the potholes and make sure our streets are stay intact. We do give the most safe ride that we can to the public. Probably later this month, we will get our street sweeper out,
Okay.
and it's hoped that the brand-new street sweeper will be delivered about mid-April, and at that point in time, we will have both of them out. So you may
How's-
have to bear with us, and we'll do what
That's
we
good.
can. Thank you.
Howard, stay up there for a minute, because I know the question is about the railroad tracks. Please let them know that we're not responsible for the main street crossing there with all the bumps there. We cannot fix that. Am I right or wrong on that?
Yes, Mr. Glenn, you are correct.
Okay.
Our city crews are not allowed to work
Right.
on railroad crossings. Anyone who has a complaint about a railroad crossing, please call the street division, which is 419-221-5165. Report your concern. Our staff will turn those concerns in to the respective railroad and request maintenance on those. And we keep a log of both complaints and when we call the respective railroad company, so we can monitor when they were advised and when it gets repaired. And again, keep in mind, probably for the next several weeks, it's going to be tough for any of us to keep the road conditions as we would like them, and that means state, county, township, city, and even the railroads. That's not an excuse, and that's not, I don't want anybody to misunderstand the message. We still need to know about the locations of these problems, but it will take time for crews to respond to all these problems. So continue to call, and if there are potholes, call the same number that I just recited at the street division, 419-221-5165. You can call that day or night and leave the message, the location of the pothole or the problem, and please leave your name and number in case there is some confusion. We can call you back for clarifications. Thank you.
Okay. And second of all, I'd like to thank Lieutenant Holman. I think that's Holman, yeah. Lieutenant Holman, he took care of a problem real fast and quick, and we took care of it, and everything worked out real good for it. And I appreciate him returning my call right back for a situation we had there. Also, we will be going around. A couple more folks going to help out with that. We are trying to work on getting the neighborhood back strong again. So we want people to get involved. We want the younger folks to get involved with it. So we're going around tomorrow at 1 o'clock. We're going to be going around the different houses, knocking on doors, giving literature out about neighborhood association, how important it is to get involved in neighborhood association. So we want to make sure we get that out there. Also, we're going to be working on our youth for jobs again. We are trying to put that together now and get ready for the summer. This weather will make your mind change for good things going on with good weather like this. I know a lot of kids been setting in, and they've been calling me saying, Mr. Glenn, when are we going to start this? So we're going to work on getting that going. Also, Lima City will be playing Liberty Bitten, against Finley. So that's arch rival. I hope we get a lot of folks down there. We're going to have good weather, so we want everybody down there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn.
President.
Mr. Geiger.
I just wanted to double check. Mr. Glenn, the issue of drug paraphernalia, was that referred to the committee?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe it was.
Yeah.
Mrs. Miles.
Thank you, Mr. President. I only have one item tonight. The Westgate Neighborhood Association is meeting March 15th, Sunday, at 6:30, and our speaker for the month will be Judge Reed. Remember, this is open to anyone who wants to come out. If we have some pretty good speakers, so it's an opportunity for you to come out and talk to these individuals one-on-one. So again, Chamberlain and Huckery Funeral Home on Cable Road is the location of the Westgate Neighborhood Association. Also, thanks for the pothole information, Mr. Also, as I've had several people talk about potholes, and we have quite a few of them on the west side here, so I will be giving this information to individuals for them to contact the streets department to let them know of the various potholes that are in the west side. And last couple of days, the weather's been pretty nice, so remember, spring is near. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mrs. Miles. Mr. Gordon?
Thank you, Mr. President. The one thing that I have might come as a great surprise to everybody, but I'm going to remind people to be good to each other, and that'll be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. McLean?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to remind everybody that we have the largest holiday coming up this weekend. It's the St. Patrick's Day weekend. So remember, there's the parade on Saturday down Main Street. So everybody get out. It's going to look like the weather's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
Everybody get out and enjoy a little bit of warmer weather and the parade, and be safe and be careful, and don't overindulge. And that's my mission of the day. Thanks.
To not overindulge, or?
Remind them not to.
Oh, okay. All right. I got you. Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Lowe?
Thank you, Mr. President. I also am going to speak on the railroad crossings. Earlier last year, our city council president came up with the idea, and we voted and sent him a letter, and I called our president because it wasn't shortly after they received that letter that they were out patching certain parts of the area, and they moved. I guess my question is, and I don't know if you are, if you haven't, but I would like for the administration to really press this issue, and not only for the residents, but we also have city vehicles, especially Main Street, is very, very, very bad. Our cruisers got to cross it, our fire trucks and ambulances have to cross it, and there's many of those holes that's more than a half-foot deep. So I'm asking you to put a little pressure on if we need to do another letter with council of the whole backing. I'm more than willing to do that. I want to make a reminder, tomorrow at 6 p.m. there's going to be an HR committee meeting here on hiring rules and regs. Also, I got quite a few stuff right here. There's a waterworks display. Anybody that would like to come in and see that, our utilities department, I believe, did a very, very beautiful display in the back. I looked at it this evening, very informative, and I just want to say that looks fantastic. I don't know exactly who put it up, but our mayor, Mayor Berger. Okay, Mary Berger, good job. It looks really nice. I asked also in November for 2 land bank meetings to be held in the month of January to educate individuals on the opportunities that are available with land in Lima, and I haven't seen that done yet. I'm asking that takes place sometime in the near future. I've had a couple residents ask me what can they do to acquire some land, and here comes Ms. Odom, so I'll let her finish that.
Council members, Mr. Lowe, there is, in fact, in April, we will be having a presentation to council on land bank, which will be followed by, if there's a need for additional information, there will be a community meeting as well. So we'll be giving an update on the current status of land bank and how that operates.
Okay, thank you. On March the 20th, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., there's going to be a mentoring session at the Bradfield Center. And it's going to be a sleepover, and they're going to have, this is for young men up to age 13. And they're going to have mentors come in and people from the community speak to these kids. And they gave me the subject of real talk. So I don't know exactly how real I can get with them, but I'm going to give it to them straight. But I asked the community if there's any men that would like to come out and support this program. Again, it's March the 20th from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. You don't have to stay the whole time, but just come and, you know, these children need to vent. Sometimes they need to speak to someone other than the individuals in their household, just to get things off of them. These kids deal with a lot of things that we don't or didn't have to deal with when we were in school. And I ask that you support that program. Also, the Raisin in the Sun will be showing at the Encore Theater, March 13th through the 15th. And I'm asking that you support that production also. And last but not least, we've had a number of shootings again in our city. Hasn't even got hot yet. 3 of the places that this has happened at is in my ward. I do have the heart pretty much of the city, so a lot of the late night recreation spots are in my ward. But it's really, putting it bluntly, getting very sickening that I can't look out my window without seeing all blue lights or blue and red lights or ambulance lights or something. I think it's very disrespectful to the businesses that are downtown. I know of one business who has had property destroyed, even to the point where he had to come out with hoses and clean up what came up. I ask the residents, if you choose to patronize these businesses, be respectful of the other abutting properties. I spoke with the chief earlier, right before council, and at this time, if you would please, I'd like for him to come forward and state to the citizens of Lima what they're doing to take on this project.
Mr. President, Mr. Lowe, the approach that we have with any problem bars really consists of, as we begin to notice more and more problems, the pinpoint police officers are first assigned to take proactive enforcement action in and around the establishments, especially at the hours when we have the most problems occurring. And with the establishments that you and I spoke about before the meeting, that is being done. Additionally, we continue to track the calls for service at those locations. And with the particular ones that we spoke about, I cannot tell you off the top of my head if contact has been made with the owners yet or not, but there will be contact made with them, follow up to let them know of the consequences against their liquor permits should these problems continue and persist. But in addition to that, I just would also like to encourage members of the community that as they are made aware of these problems to please call us as they are occurring. Again, it is not something that we take lightly, especially with anytime you inject alcohol into what otherwise might be simple disagreements with people, they can quickly and easily get out of hand, and the violence will be elevated. So we like to try to get on top of those things and deal with them as proactively as we possibly can. But at the same time, we can't be everywhere at once. So when people see things occurring, we need them to give us a call and let us know as they're occurring, and we will respond appropriately.
Okay, and the other issue on that is overcapacity of some of these places. I don't know what you can do to rectify that problem, but I've seen a couple spots where it's been, at a minimum, double capacity that should be in those facilities. And I think, I don't know, with the bumping and the drinking or whatever, it's getting really out of hand. And again, I thank you, but I have received tons of calls, and I don't want individuals to be scared to patronize businesses in the downtown area, because they don't see the good, but they hear about the bad.
In terms of the capacity issues, whatever the occupancy is rated at, police officers do by ordinance have the authority to go in and do those counts, and if they are over, to require the whoever's in charge of the business at the time to either reduce the numbers inside to the appropriate occupancy levels, or we can shut them down for the night. And the officers are aware of that, and they're instructed to do those counts. I will say sometimes to do an accurate count, though, is very difficult in the confined spaces and as people are coming and going and those types of things. But that is something the officers are aware of and do normally look out for.
And one more thing before you, Mr. President, one more thing. I've getting a lot of feedback from residents who say every time they turn around, they see the Ohio State Highway Patrol in our city, and they're wondering why they're not on the highway and they're in the city. I know they have full jurisdiction, but could you explain that to the residents that don't know that? But my question to you is, why are they here so much? Why are they in town so much?
Well, I will just say that in terms of their jurisdiction, yes, they have jurisdiction on any street or highway within the state of Ohio. And so again, to say why aren't they out on the highway, you know, we have many state highways that come through the city. But in addition to that, they are here because Lima, frankly, has one of the higher per capita accident rates that you're going to find in the state of Ohio, unfortunately. And they are attempting to help and assist with proactive traffic enforcement in order to try to get those accident rates down. And again, as far as they're coming into the city and taking enforcement action, they do not need my permission to do that, nor do I have the authority to tell them to stay out. But frankly, even if I had the authority to tell them to stay out, I would not want to do that because they do provide us assistance in acting as a deterrent as well as being able to promote traffic safety.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
All
President.
right, thank you, Mr. Lowe. Mr. Tevin?
Just, excuse me, one item this evening. I also had a conversation with the chief, and I believe it's about the same establishment and the issues that it's causing for other business owners in the downtown community. So I'm sure that we can take action that will help this situation. And I encourage, as the chief said, if people see these things happening, please notify the police department and please get them involved because they can make a difference. And there's been too many good things happen in downtown Lima, too much positive momentum to allow the actions of a few to destroy that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tevin. Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Mr. President. As I had said earlier, I want to call a Public Works Committee meeting for next Monday, March 16th at 5 p.m. We'll be discussing the proposed draft of the 1642 chapter as it relates to graffiti. And also the other issue was amending the zoning code for Business 1, Business 2 district for recreational to include paintball. And an ongoing subject that's still in committee, Chapter 1409, the special building criteria within Design Review District will also be on the agenda, but the first two priorities is the graffiti and the zoning. And I wanted to announce Saturday, March 21st at 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. at Shawnee Road McDonald's. That's 2455 Shawnee. Will be Coffee with a Cop. It's the first program of the year for this. Please join neighbors and the police officers for coffee and conversation. Again, Saturday, March 21st, 10 to noon at the Shawnee McDonald's, sponsored by LACNIP. Over the weekend, I happened to watch on C-SPAN 3 the 50th anniversary of the Selma March. I was 10 years old at the time when this occurred. Listening to President Obama He stressed that that march was the right to register to vote. He stressed 50 years later, now it's time to vote. We have the right to register. Let's register, let's vote. We have a primary coming up in May, and then a general election in November. And I know other counselors have spoke on this as it gets closer. I was very moved by all the speakers in that event on C-SPAN. If you get an opportunity, try and catch it in replay, and see if that doesn't motivate you to get out and vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. I just have two related items, two separate but related. I'm asking that Lima City Council authorize a resolution of condolences for Mr. Ora Buckmaster and for Dorothy Riker. It'll be two separate resolutions. And that's a motion.
Second.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Now, by way of explanation, Mr. Buckmaster was a Lima City Council member in the 5th Ward from 1969 to 1973, and he passed away on January 30th. And Dorothy Riker was a former council member and in fact was the, I believe, first woman elected to Lima City Council in 1973 in the 8th Ward when it was newly formed. She served until 1991. So both of their obituaries were in the Lima News last week on the same day, which was kind of odd. And quite frankly, I had heard that Dorothy had passed away, but I frankly wasn't aware that Mr. Buckmaster had been on council. And as we discussed it in pre-council, he came on council when I was like 8 years old. So nobody else up here remembers what they were doing when they were 8 years old or who was on council either. But nonetheless, I want to authorize those resolutions of condolences. Both of them do have family members who are still in town, living in Lima, so obviously we extend our condolences belatedly to them, but we will have a resolution on at a future meeting. So, other than that, I wouldn't be holding up my heritage if I didn't wish everybody a safe and happy St. Patrick's Day on the 17th, and stress the safe part on St. Patrick's Day. That's all I have.
Mr. President,
Mr. Tevin?
I move that Lima City Council adjourn until 7 p.m. on March 23rd in these chambers.
Second.
The motion and the second is that Lima City Council adjourn until 7 p.m. on March 23rd. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion carries and we are adjourned.
Howard?